Hey, beautiful family. So how do we see God face to face? You know, having a relationship with God is more than a human relationship. Humans have relationships most often with personality. And to have a relationship with God as a personality is wrong, because that personality varies from human being to human being, and God can express himself through each human being and what they bring to this world. There is no Godhead personality on the planet. And trying to have a relationship directly with God through a personality is a failing of many religions in the world at the moment. But some of these religions did say that persons had seen God face to face. Jacob in the Bible said, "I have seen God face to face, and I call that place Peniel." When you look at the story that leads up to him saying that, something interesting occurs. Because all around the planet we have this reference to our temple body. Our body is how we commune with God. Without your body, you're not going to be able to commune with God. Now, your body, however, has a polarity. Just as I can take fire and I can cook for these beautiful children that we care for in Tanzania, I can also take fire and I can burn somebody with it. And so too with your body. It can be used based upon the intention governing it for a positive and a negative. Now, the intention comes from ourselves. And when we understand that we can start choosing our thoughts, we can start choosing our intentions, and we can start choosing our manifestations. But if you really want to choose your intentions, you have to leave the animal kingdom, even if only briefly. And by that, it's not that your entirety leaves, because you are dependent on the animal kingdom. You are dependent on the natural world. You can't breathe without a tree. You're one. You are one. Simple as that. The planet has peopled you as a forest has tree to tree. It's just no different. But the impulse of the animal and the survival state that we can all live within is very much not something we have to be in. We can move from that hell, which is survival, into the state of creation, which is heaven. And many animals can't do this. We can. And so we must sever away from that survival aspect. And that represents many parts of us. Many young men and women in this world are addicted to pornography because they've had their survival instinct capitalized and profited from their want to procreate, and those natural parts of them that provides a sex drive has been tapped into using technology to be profitable. And in doing so, they are surrendering their beingness, their creativity, their ability to be a creator on this planet, for surrendering to temporal pleasure, which is being fueled by the survival aspect of them. And in our world, there are persons living in survival constantly because we have not allowed technology to reach every corner of the world. And this is an interesting balance as well. But ultimately, this survival part of us that leads to negative impulsive behavior is what we should address. Now, to do that, you need to be able to start choosing your thoughts, which means you need to be able to start being selective of your thoughts, or you need to be able to make your heart louder than your thinking mind. Because the thinking mind is problem solving, and that is survival. Now, if you are sitting here, you cannot choose what thoughts will appear in your head. You can determine your vibration, you can enter your heart, and you can kind of ensure that you don't vibrate with certain thought waves and certain frequencies of entities that sometimes provide thoughts. But you can't then determine which thoughts are going to come. You don't know what past Memories might rise up. You don't know what anxieties of the future might rise up. But what you can do is when you see them, you can witness them and observe them and give them no attention. And that's where your power lay. Because then you can deliberately hold on to the attention of yourself and your intention on the thoughts that you want, on the thoughts that you want to see manifest in your future. For everything around you begins with an intention. The camera I speak to you on, whatever device you're listening on, whichever painted room and chair you're sitting upon, these things came into creation starting with a human intention. And so Jacob saw God face to face in the place he called Peniel, and we too can see God face to face in a place we call Peniel. And the story of Jacob tells you this, but it doesn't tell you it directly. It tells you it in code. So leading up to that line, Jacob arrives at a stream called Jabbok, and Jabbok is a Hebrew word, and that word means to empty yourself. He is with his wife, he's with other woman as well, and his children. And he says that they have to stay here while he crosses the stream of Jabbok. And he says, leave my possessions here also. So he crosses this stream, which means to empty yourself, and leaves behind him his worldly desires, his worldly attachments, and his possessions, and his desires for his wife and women, etc. He crosses water, a body of water, as my recent video showed. Beta, alpha, theta, delta, stages of human consciousness within us. Earth, water, air, fire, as the ancients encoded it, because they didn't have this scientific term. They just had the experience of this consciousness internally and gave it a code. So he crosses from beta to alpha, he crosses the water, by emptying himself and releasing attachment to his possessions. That's what it is. Jabbok, it's to empty. Then he meets a man that turns out to be an angel. Because as you raise through those levels of consciousness, you know, angels, they love themselves like we do. I love myself enough not to walk into a drug den every day to try and save drug addicts, because it would drag me down and it would burn me out. And so it's easier for us to have an office where sometimes drug addicts can come to the office and get the help that they need, rather than us going to these low energy places. We do frequent them, but we don't go every day because it burns you out. An angel is no different. If you want to commune with angels, you better raise yourself up to their vibration, because they love themselves too much to keep coming down to the earthly vibration. And so you must raise up through those levels of consciousness. You must cross earth to water to air to fire, beta to alpha to theta to delta. You have to, if you want to commune with angels. Now Jacob begins to wrestle with this angel, and this angel touches him on the hip, and in touching him on the hip, dislocates his hip. The hip is the root of many of the animal passions, the appetite, the sexual lust, etc. That angel, just as we all do wrestle with our lower self, that angel was the higher realms of consciousness coming into a union with Jacob's lower realms, and dislocating the hip was cutting away the lower nature. And then they continue to wrestle, and Jacob says he won't let go until you bless me. And the angel says, from this day forth I will call you Israel. Made up of 3 words, Isis, Ra, and Elohim. Isis feminine, Ra masculine, Elohim the masculine feminine.
When you look into your imagination, we'll begin with a spin, traveling in the world of my creation, living there. You will see what you truly wish to be. If you want to view paradise, simply look around and view it. Anything you want to do it. Once you change the world, nothing to it. There is no life I know that compares with pure imagination.
When Jacob starts climbing through those stages of consciousness by emptying himself, Jabbok, leaving behind his attachments and worldly possessions, not forever, only for a period, he meets an angel that dislocates his lower nature, which is exactly what happens to all of us when we race through these vibratory brain frequencies in fasting and prayer. Then he finds a complete union. In modern terms, you might say he integrates his shadow. In the Gospel of Thomas, I said this in my other video about this topic, Jesus said that when the male become female, the female become male. It doesn't eliminate that we have certain differences as human beings. There is a modern Western fallacy that male and female attributes are purely based on societal, psychological aspects, and it's not true. It's just evident here where people don't have TVs and don't have that influence. There's still clearly a role based on the gender that you have. But what it means is when you know yourself, when you know every side of yourself, you know, the whole entirety of what we are, we have the ability to be very loving and nurturing, which is labeled as the feminine in esoteric or mystic texts. And we have the ability to be strong and to hold ourselves up, which is labeled as masculine. And this is just a label of the energies, and a woman can be also Israel as well as a man can be Israel. It's knowing yourself. Because when you know more of yourself, you have more of yourself to give and to love and to use as a weapon for God, as a disciple, as a force for creation. And so, where do you find that realization, that unity? You know, Saint Isaac, the Syrian, he said, many people say they love God, but not many people know how to love God. And he also spoke so heavily that what we seek is solitude, but not a loneliness. And solitude is solitary mindedness on your focused goal of perhaps loving God or service to one another, it's an expression of loving God. But you can't do that if you have inner conflict. You must have a perfect union within you. Union is yoga. Yoke is yoga. My yoke is easy, as Jesus said. And so you must find this union within you to be able to bring the love into the world that God asked us to bring into the world. And so, once he is Israel and finds that complete union within himself of the whole potentiality of his inner energy, that he is made up of male and female at the point of conception, and that deep down within, the nurturing side and the warring side, the animal side and the spiritual side, the hot and the cold, the male and the female, it's all understood. The polarity of self is understood, and at that point he says, I have seen God face to face. My life is preserved, and I call that place Peniel. And of course, as many of us know in this world, some persons, they have absolute union with God and they know nothing about the anatomy, the anatomical side of themselves with God, and that's fine. They don't need to. They really don't need to. I see it in very godly people around me, friends, colleagues, etc. They don't need it. They are practicing it, and that's what matters. You don't need to know how the engine works in a car to drive it well. But for me as a man, I needed to know this. Because I needed to understand that when I look across the world, there's this emphasis on this part of the body. And this is the temple of God. As it says, sexual immorality is sinning against the very temple of God. So it's a very harsh thing to conquer. It's very polluting. It's very damaging. Then you begin to understand the temple is you. And God did not place a doorway to evil inside your temple, any more than him giving you a penis or a vagina was him giving you a doorway to be a rapist or to be sexually immoral or to lie and cheat to get what you want sexually. That wasn't why it was put there. It's not why it's there. It's there so you can have children and share in intimacy with a loved one and have a family. It's there for that reason. And this beautiful center of the top of our temple, the very top of our temple body, the very center of it is this gland. And this is our means of sight and speech with that timeless presence of the cosmos that we call God. It's there inside us, but you've got to switch it on. And when you are dwelling in the lower nature and that angel does not dislocate your hip and sever it, you cannot switch it on. You must understand that your body is like a barometer. It has certain energy inside it. And that energy will rise and allow you to have the presence of God based on the purity of your intention, based on the purity of your action. And you can have this different relationship with God's presence. It doesn't mean that God loves you when you're making errors. Our mistakes can't go deeper than God's love can reach. Our sins, as it were, can't go deeper than God's love can reach. We are all loved and accepted and forgiven. And it's a shame that others don't grasp the teachings. And many Christians, they judge other people's sin and say, oh, you'll be dealt with by God. You're more sinful than me. It's like, let he who is without sin cast the first stone. God will deal with that. God will help that person to heal, to overcome the wounds from childhood. The patterns inside their subconscious of habit that they often had no control over, having rooted in their brains. God will love you no matter what. But I'm talking about the tools here of being able to hear God, having the faith, the experiences that lead to the faith of being able to totally surrender to God and his will, and to say to God, I'm not here to do my own will but your own will. And this is a very hard journey. Mine gets intermixed with God's will very often. It's a very hard journey, and the only way I can ensure that it's more of God's will manifesting is by sitting in God's presence and hearing God. And when you dream, you hear God through your pineal. It's the only other retina in your body. This is where mental imagery is coming from. When you are meditating and you raise that energy up, you find this contentment and peace in your body that means the impulses of things that would pull you normally into your survival side away from your creation, to pass the time, to satiate boredom, to quell the addiction or the demon that is within you. You find such contentment and wholeness when you are dwelling in the higher place. And whether you're aware of it or not, good people live good lives never knowing this information. But what they're not doing is spending this barometer on worldly pursuits, on worldly desires and worldly entertainment. They are instead nurturing it and squeezing that precious fluid within them, the chrism, the barometer of life within you, up to the higher temple and activating the anatomy of prayer. And in that space, you can't scheme, you can't lie, You can't adult, because when you get into it, all of those things are abhorrent. They make no sense to you. They give you no fulfillment. Doesn't mean you might not slip. Doesn't mean that the temperature, look at it like a thermometer, the temperature might drop and you might fall down your lower nature and you feel a need to feel full, or you feel some emotional emptiness, and so you try to satiate it with drugs or with whatever addiction, with sex and just mindless entertainment, etc. We are all going to do that. This is our nature. But at least we can be aware that when it happens, as many are, we need to run away from it as fast as possible to try and re-enter that higher place and see God face to face in the place we call Peniel. And the more time you spend in that place, the less likely, in my experience, you are to fall. But it takes a lot of effort for some of us, because our brains on the surface are learning these new ways. But deep down, from being a child, some of us have been exposed to these patterns in our subconscious of sin. And for those to be totally ripped out of you, some people say it happens miraculously overnight. That never happened with me. I know the roots of these problems are still somewhere within me in some aspects as well. And it's took time to make these conscious waves of a realization that I need to live in more purity, to get deeper and deeper and cut in to those subconscious patterns of behavior that make us misbehave, that make us do the things we know we shouldn't, and then afterwards we feel dreadful for doing them. It takes me effort to make those waves bigger, because I have stuff to remove from my lower subconscious mind, whereas other people perhaps did never create those patterns, and so they don't have much work to do, because this is more clear and more self-loving and self-caring. But if you really want to see God face to face, the story's there. Empty yourself, Jabbok. Leave your possessions and attachments at one side in the earth level. Not forever. You need these things. They make up who you are and your life in this world. But cross the water, beta to alpha, earth to water. Wrestle the angels as you rise through those stages of consciousness and vibrate in a space where they can come to meet you and help you. Allow the angel to dislocate your hip and cut away your lower nature and your lower desires. Let the angel bless you by giving you that full union and understanding of yourself. Israel, your name will be. The masculine, feminine, unified, the hot, the cold, unified, the dark, the light within you. Understanding your own full nature instead of externalizing the dark nature of yourself and saying that all these world leaders are evil, all these people are bad and I'm perfect, when you're not realizing that the same fertile soils are there for the same issues to come out of you if you were placed in a position of power. And we must identify those to make sure when that power comes or opportunity comes that we are aware of it and we don't get caught off guard by a lurking secret part of us that we haven't identified exists. And then you will be able, as Jacob said, to say, "I've seen God face to face." Call that place Peniel, the top of your temple. When you vibrated in that space with God, and it's without thought, and it's a pure divine connection within your heart, you know this is correct. And if you haven't touched it and you long for God, and yet you find yourself only caught up in words all the time, if you want a direct experience with God, do as I mentioned St. Isaac the Syrian did. Find the space and silence within you, because the less of you find, the more of God can come within. The less of your presence, the more of the presence of God will radiate from you. So, that was all. God bless, guys.